This is why they couldn't let you go. My beloved child, listen carefully, don't skip this message, because there is a reason this person couldn't completely let you go, and it may be deeper than you ever imagined. You may have watched them walk away. You may have seen the silence grow between you. You may have believed they had forgotten you, replaced you, or finally moved on. Maybe they even acted like they didn't care. But sometimes what a person shows on the outside has very little to do with what they are carrying on the inside. There are people who can leave physically while remaining emotionally attached to a memory, a feeling, a conversation, or a person they never fully understood how to release. And perhaps that is what has been happening here. They couldn't let you go, not necessarily because they were destined to return, but because something about this connection changed them. There was something about you they couldn't easily recreate somewhere else. Maybe it was the way you listened. Maybe it was the way you made them feel understood without demanding an explanation for every emotion. Maybe it was your patience. Maybe it was your ability to see the good in them when they were struggling to see it themselves. Maybe it was simply the feeling of being around someone who didn't require them to pretend. Whatever it was, they may not have recognized its value while they had access to it. Sometimes people don't understand what makes a connection special until they experience its absence. And perhaps your absence became louder than your presence ever was. When you were there, they could assume you would always be there. They could postpone conversations. They could avoid difficult questions. They could take another day to decide. But when you finally stepped back, something changed. The silence gave them room to think. Suddenly, the little things they overlooked became memories. The conversations they once considered ordinary became moments they wished they could repeat. The person they thought they could replace became someone they couldn't stop remembering. Maybe they tried. Maybe they told themselves, "I'm moving on." Maybe they distracted themselves. Maybe they met new people. Maybe they convinced everyone around them that they were fine. But then something small happened. A song played. A familiar place appeared. Someone said your name. A date arrived. A photograph resurfaced. And suddenly, they were back in the past. Not because they wanted to suffer. Because memory has a way of returning when emotions haven't been completely resolved. Maybe they started asking themselves questions they had avoided for a long time. Why do I still think about them? Why does their absence still bother me? Why do I compare other connections to what I had with them? Why did I walk away when part of me wanted to stay? Those questions can become uncomfortable. Because eventually, a person has to confront their own choices. And perhaps that is where this person is now. They may be realizing that losing you wasn't simply about losing a relationship. It was about losing a version of themselves that existed around you. Maybe around you they felt softer. More honest. More hopeful. Maybe you brought out a part of them that they didn't know how to protect. And when you were gone, they discovered that part of themselves was gone too. That's why they couldn't let you go. Not because you were perfect. Not because your relationship had no problems. Not because you were the only person they could ever love. But because the connection touched something inside them that they hadn't finished understanding. And sometimes unfinished emotions are difficult to release. Maybe they never told you how deeply they were affected. Maybe pride prevented them from admitting it. Maybe they were afraid that telling you would give you power over them. Maybe they thought vulnerability meant weakness. So instead of saying, "I'm scared of losing you," they became distant. Instead of saying, "I care more than I know how to handle," they acted indifferent. Instead of asking for another chance, they waited for you to make the first move. And perhaps both of you ended up waiting. Two people feeling something. Two people protecting themselves. Two people hoping the other person would understand without having to say it. That's how misunderstandings become distance. And distance can become a habit. But habits don't erase feelings. They only hide them. Maybe they still carry the memory of a specific moment with you. Something so small you might not even remember it. Perhaps you laughed together at something ridiculous. Maybe you stayed up talking about life. Maybe you encouraged them when they were struggling. Maybe you said something that changed how they saw themselves. Maybe you were simply there during a season when everyone else seemed to disappear. People remember how you made them feel during difficult seasons. Sometimes more than they remember what you actually said. And perhaps that's why they couldn't let you go. Because when life became difficult, their mind returned to the place where they once felt understood. Maybe they don't miss every part of the relationship. Maybe they miss the emotional safety. The familiarity. The feeling that someone genuinely cared. And this is where you need wisdom. Missing someone doesn't automatically mean they are ready to build a healthy relationship. Someone can miss you and still repeat the same mistakes. Someone can love you and still lack the emotional maturity to love you properly. Someone can regret losing you and still be unable to give you what you need. That's why you should never measure the future by someone's longing alone. Measure it by their actions. If they return, what has changed? Have they taken responsibility? Have they learned? Have they become more honest? Are they willing to communicate? Are they willing to respect your boundaries? Do they understand why the relationship broke down? Those questions matter. Because if they return with the same behavior, the reunion becomes another cycle. And you didn't survive the past just to repeat it. Maybe the reason they couldn't let you go is because you represented something they weren't ready to appreciate. You represented genuine connection. You represented emotional honesty. You represented the possibility of being known. And perhaps being known frightened them. Because when someone truly sees you, hiding becomes difficult. They may have been comfortable with relationships where they could keep parts of themselves hidden. But with you, something was different. Maybe you noticed things they never said. Maybe you could sense when they were upset. Maybe you understood when their "I'm fine" didn't mean fine. That kind of connection can be beautiful. But it can also be terrifying for someone who has spent years protecting themselves. Maybe they ran because being close to you meant confronting themselves. And sometimes people run from the person who sees them most clearly. Not because that person is wrong for them. Because being seen requires courage. Perhaps they needed distance to understand that. Maybe the separation gave them perspective. Maybe they began recognizing their own patterns. Maybe they saw how often they pushed people away when they felt vulnerable. Maybe they realized they expected others to read their mind instead of communicating. Maybe they recognized that pride cost them something valuable. And perhaps now they regret it. But regret alone isn't enough. Regret should lead to responsibility. If they truly understand what happened, they won't simply say, "I miss you." They'll say, "I understand what I did." They'll acknowledge the consequences. They'll listen to what you experienced. They'll stop making everything about their feelings. They'll care about yours too. That is the difference between nostalgia and growth. Nostalgia says, "I miss how you made me feel." Growth says, "I understand how I hurt you, and I want to do better." Maybe this person is somewhere between those two places. Maybe they're beginning to understand. Maybe they're not there yet. And you don't have to rush them. You don't have to rescue them from their confusion. You don't have to send a message just because you're afraid they'll forget. If someone truly cannot let you go, they will eventually have to confront why. And when they do, the truth will become clearer. Maybe they realize they don't want to lose you. Maybe they realize they want closure. Maybe they realize they want friendship. Maybe they realize they genuinely want to rebuild. Whatever the answer, clarity is better than uncertainty. And perhaps your role is not to force the answer. It's to remain grounded while it unfolds. Maybe you've been wondering whether their silence means they've stopped caring. Not necessarily. Silence can mean many things. Fear, pride, confusion, avoidance, respect, healing, or simply moving on. You can't know which one without communication. That's why you shouldn't build your emotional world around assumptions. Let them show you. If they want to speak, listen. If they want to return, observe. If they want to rebuild, ask what has changed. And if they cannot give you a clear answer, don't sacrifice your peace waiting for one. Because you deserve clarity too. Maybe this person couldn't let you go because you were the first person who made them feel like they could be completely themselves. Maybe they remember the way you looked at them when they were vulnerable. Maybe they remember the way you encouraged them. Maybe they remember the moments when you stayed when you could have walked away. And perhaps now they understand how rare that was. But don't let their realization make you forget your own journey. You went through pain too. You had nights when you wondered whether you mattered. You had moments when you questioned your worth. You may have blamed yourself. You may have replayed conversations. You may have wondered what you could have done differently. But perhaps you did enough. Perhaps the lesson wasn't that you needed to love harder. Perhaps it was that you needed to stop carrying the entire connection alone. Relationships require two people. One person cannot communicate for two. One person cannot apologize for two. One person cannot build trust for two. One person cannot choose for two. If this person returns, let them participate. Let them show you that they can carry their side. Maybe that's the real reason they couldn't let you go. They realized that you were always giving them emotional space, but they never learned how to create the same space for you. And perhaps now they're beginning to understand what mutual love actually requires. Maybe they thought love meant intensity. Now they understand love means consistency. Maybe they thought love meant never leaving. Now they understand love means knowing when to communicate. Maybe they thought love meant being together constantly. Now they understand love means respecting each other's individuality. Maybe they thought love was about avoiding conflict. Now they understand healthy love is about repairing conflict. Those are lessons people often learn only after losing something important. And perhaps losing access to you gave them that lesson. Maybe there is another reason they couldn't let you go. You didn't just love the person they were. You believed in the person they could become. That can leave a deep mark. Because when someone sees potential in you, you remember them. Even if you aren't ready to become that person yet. Maybe you inspired them. Maybe you challenged them. Maybe your presence made them want to become better. And when you left, that expectation disappeared. They had to face themselves without you. Maybe they realized that they had been blaming circumstances for choices they were making themselves. Maybe they realized they had been afraid to commit. Maybe they realized they were using confusion as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Maybe they realized that they had hurt someone who genuinely cared. And perhaps that realization has been following them. That doesn't mean they are guaranteed to return. But it means the connection may have mattered more than they ever admitted. And perhaps that's what you needed to know. Not that they are destined to come back. Not that you should wait. But that what you experienced was real to you. And perhaps it was real to them too. You don't have to invalidate your own memories just because the relationship ended. Something can be real and still end. Something can be meaningful and still not last forever. Something can change you and still become part of your past. That's a mature way to love. Maybe the universe isn't asking you to hold on. Maybe it's asking you to release the need to control the outcome. If they come back, you'll decide. If they don't, you'll continue. Either way, your life moves forward. And perhaps that is what makes you powerful. You no longer need to chase the person who couldn't let you go. You can let them figure out what they want. You can let them confront their feelings. You can let them decide whether they are capable of approaching you with honesty. And while they do that, you can continue becoming yourself. Maybe they will eventually reach out. Maybe the message will be simple. I've been thinking about you. Maybe it will be longer. Maybe they will finally tell you what they never had the courage to say. Maybe they will apologize. Maybe they will ask whether you would be willing to talk. And when that moment comes, don't respond from the version of yourself that was desperate for them to return. Respond from the version that has learned. You don't have to punish them. But you don't have to pretend nothing happened. You can say, I care about you, but I need honesty. You can say, if we're going to talk, I need us to talk about what happened. You can say, I don't want to repeat the same cycle. That's not cold. That's love with boundaries. And if they genuinely care, they'll respect it. Maybe they will surprise you. Maybe they will actually listen. Maybe they'll admit things you never expected. Maybe they'll tell you they were afraid. Maybe they'll tell you that they tried to forget you. Maybe they'll say they met other people but still thought about you. Maybe they'll admit that every attempt to move forward brought them back to the same unresolved questions. But remember, you are not responsible for filling the emptiness they feel. You are not their therapist. You are not their emotional rescue. You are their potential partner only if both of you choose that role in a healthy way. That's important. Love should be partnership, not rescue. Maybe they couldn't let you go because they knew that you were one of the few people who truly saw them. But now they have to learn to see themselves too. They need to become whole without relying on you. And you need to remain whole without relying on them. That's how a healthy reunion becomes possible. Two complete people. Not two wounded people trying to use each other to avoid healing. Perhaps the separation was necessary for that. Maybe you needed to discover your own strength. Maybe they needed to discover their own accountability. Maybe the distance created the maturity that proximity never could. And perhaps now, if your paths cross again, you will both recognize the difference. The old connection may have been full of intensity. The new connection can be full of peace. The old connection may have been full of questions. The new connection can be full of communication. The old connection may have been about who would chase whom. The new connection can be about walking together. That is the kind of reunion worth considering. Not simply because they couldn't let you go, but because they finally know how to hold on without controlling you. Maybe that's the secret. They couldn't let you go because you became part of their story. But now they have to decide whether they want to remain trapped in the memory or learn from it. And perhaps you have the same choice. You can keep replaying the past. Or you can carry the lesson forward. You can keep asking why they left. Or you can ask what you learned. You can keep wondering whether they still care. Or you can ask whether you are being treated with care now. That shift changes everything. Because love isn't measured only by what someone feels privately. It's measured by what they are willing to build publicly and consistently. If they return, let them build. Let them show. Let them earn trust. Let them demonstrate that the person who couldn't let you go has become the person who knows how to love you properly. And if they cannot, let them remain a meaningful chapter rather than an unfinished prison. Your life is too valuable to spend indefinitely waiting for someone to become ready. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But you will continue. You will grow. You will become stronger. You will meet new people. You will experience new forms of love. And perhaps one day, you'll realize that you no longer need an answer. You won't need to know why they couldn't let you go. Because you'll understand that the real question was never whether they could release you. The real question was whether you could release the version of yourself that kept waiting for them. And perhaps now you can. Maybe that is why everything feels different. You aren't losing your connection. You're losing your attachment to uncertainty. You're losing the need to predict. You're losing the fear that your future depends on someone else's decision. And what remains is peace. Maybe they return. Maybe they don't. But you are still here. Still growing. Still loving. Still capable of happiness. Still capable of becoming someone extraordinary. And if they return, let them meet that person. Let them see the strength that grew from the pain. Let them see the wisdom that came from the silence. Let them see that you didn't become cold. You became clear. And perhaps that clarity will make them realize what they truly lost. Not someone who would wait forever. Someone who loved deeply but finally learned to love themselves too. That kind of person is difficult to forget. But being unforgettable isn't the goal. Being respected is. Being valued is. Being loved in a healthy way is. So don't measure your worth by whether they can let you go. Measure it by whether you can choose what is healthy for you. Maybe their inability to let you go is simply evidence that the connection mattered. But what happens next will determine whether it belongs in your future. And perhaps the next chapter is waiting for both of you to make that decision consciously. If they return with honesty, listen. If they return with accountability, observe. If they return with consistency, consider. If they return only with nostalgia, be careful. The past can feel beautiful because it cannot hurt you in new ways. The future is where real choices happen. And perhaps you are finally ready for the future. Maybe they are too. But don't rush. Let time reveal everything. Let their behavior answer what your heart has been asking. And remember that you don't need to chase someone who truly wants to return. They will find a way to communicate. They will make the effort. They will respect your boundaries. They will show you. Not perfectly, but consistently. That is enough. Maybe one day they'll finally tell you, I couldn't let you go because I realized what you meant to me. And perhaps you'll smile. Not because you needed to hear it. Because you already knew your love mattered. You knew the connection was significant. You knew you had given something genuine. And now, whether they stay or go, you can honor what it taught you. Maybe the relationship was meant to teach you self-worth. Maybe it was meant to teach them courage. Maybe you were meant to awaken something in each other. And perhaps awakening doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes it means becoming better because you met. That's still beautiful. So don't be afraid of the ending. If the story continues, let it continue with honesty. If it ends, let it end with peace. Either way, you don't have to chase the past. You can walk toward the future. And perhaps that is where the most beautiful surprise waits. Maybe the person who couldn't let you go will eventually understand that the only way to truly keep you is not to control you. It is to choose you. Respect you. Listen to you. Communicate with you. Grow with you. And perhaps they will finally be ready to do that. But if they aren't, your life doesn't stop. You keep moving. Because you are not someone's unfinished chapter. You are a whole story. You are not someone's second choice. You are worthy of being chosen clearly. You are not a memory waiting to be reopened. You are a person deserving of a present. And that is the difference between being remembered and being loved. Being remembered lives in the past. Being loved is demonstrated in the present. So if this person still carries you in their heart, let them carry the memory. If they want more than memory, let them act. If they want another chance, let them build. If they want your trust, let them earn it. And if they want your heart, let them understand that your heart is no longer something you give away without wisdom. You learned too much for that. You survived too much for that. You grew too much for that. And perhaps that growth is exactly what makes the next chapter possible. Because if you ever come back together, it won't be because neither of you could move on. It will be because both of you learned how to move forward. That's the kind of love worth choosing. And perhaps this is your beautiful ending. They couldn't let you go because something about you changed them. But you don't have to hold yourself in place because they haven't forgotten you. Let them find their own way. Let them confront their own heart. Let them decide what they truly want. And you keep becoming the person you were always meant to be. If they return, meet them with wisdom. If they apologize, meet them with discernment. If they change, meet them slowly. If they don't, release them peacefully. Because the ultimate victory isn't making someone unable to forget you. The ultimate victory is becoming so secure in yourself that whether they remember you or not, you still know who you are. And one day, you may look back at this entire story and realize something beautiful. They couldn't let you go because the connection mattered. But you finally learned how to let go of the fear that you would never be loved again. You finally learned how to release the need for one person to validate your worth. You finally learned that love can be deep without being destructive. You finally learned that someone can be important without being your entire world. And that lesson will stay with you forever. So breathe. Let the past rest. Let the future come. If their path leads back to you, let them walk it with intention. If their path leads elsewhere, let them go without taking your peace with them. Your heart has survived uncertainty. Now it deserves clarity. Your soul has survived waiting. Now it deserves movement. Your love has survived disappointment. Now it deserves reciprocity. And perhaps the most beautiful chapter is not the one where they finally come back. Maybe it's the one where you finally stop waiting, and discover that you were never lost at all. You were becoming. You were healing. You were finding yourself. And when love comes again, whether it is with this person or someone new, you will know the difference between being wanted and being valued. Between being missed and being chosen. Between being remembered and being loved. And that knowledge is something nobody can take away from you. So if they couldn't let you go, let that be their journey. Your journey is different. Your journey is to become free. Free to love. Free to choose. Free to walk away. Free to begin again. And if the two journeys eventually meet again, let it happen because both people are ready, not because either person is afraid to be alone. Then, and only then, can the story truly become something beautiful. Not a story about someone who couldn't let you go. But a story about two people who finally learned how to choose each other without losing themselves. And that, my beloved child, is the ending you deserve. Not endless waiting. Not confusion. Not chasing. But clarity. Peace. Mutual love. And a future where you never again have to question whether you are worthy of being chosen. Because you already are.